September 23rd from the Cinder reportage. There are so many dying, they don't keep a record of names, but put the medical files of those who had died in a pile that gets picked up and dumped somewhere else after 12 hours.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, we were working, that's right, in the Zinder area in an MSF intensive care ward in one of these centers. And as you walked in on the left, there was a table. This is in the worst room where the worst affected children were trying to survive, and we were trying to actually count the dead because we were trying to do our own, statistical work as best we could. And what we found was that there wasn't a meticulous record of how many people had died in all of these places because people were dying in large numbers.
Johanna Sekkenes disagreed with your description.
Sorry, who did?
Johanna Sekkenes.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was that we had a problem. I just don't remember exactly, to be honest.
Yvette Bontour-Velu remembers this very well. She worked as a nurse for Doctors Without Borders in Niger in 2005, and the BBC visited her.
C'est pas ça. Bon, il est évident qu'on ne peut pas faire voir la joie de tout le systématiquement, mais je pense qu'elles seraient venues un dimanche où nous donnions des fêtes dans le camp, elles auraient halluciné parce qu'on voyait des personnes qui avaient envie de sourire, de rire, de danser. Donc ça n'avait plus rien à voir avec le misérabilisme qu'elle voulait entretenir. Donc ça, c'est ce qui m'a le plus gênée. Bon, maintenant, chacun fait son métier comme il le veut et comme il le pense. Hein, mais je n'ai pas cautionné du tout.
Just 1 in 10 of the starving has reached the few clinics. It's being called the hunger that's silent. 1 in 4 young children die each year here anyway because of Niger's devastating poverty. Few noticed in time when less rain pushed this country to this. Sometimes the mothers take their children home to die rather than watching it here. Hilary Anderson, BBC News in Niger.
Well, the close-up is a lie. And the tone in her voice, she might as well be working for an aid organization. I mean, she's begging and weeping to us on behalf of these children and these people, and it's horrible and it's moving. But it's not journalism.
Michael Marin said, "This is not journalism, the way you are presenting the stories." What is your reaction to that?
Well, we were very clear about being journalists and not aid workers, as we always have to be. I didn't create this story. I turned up and reported on it when no one else had, and was given the credit for having, opened the eyes of the world to the food shortage in Niger. And yes, our team did that.
Det är inte den verklighet som jag har sett. Ja, jag vet inte vad jag skulle säga om jag träffade Hilary Anderson som människa. Men jag skulle inte ha någon respekt för hennes journalistik. Men det är svårt att se döende barn, och det kostar. Det är inte vackert. Det är inte så att man sitter och tänker men det där har aldrig hänt och det barnet dog inte och det barnet lider inte. Jag menar, barnen lider ju så du känner det i venerna. Och den verkligheten, den är inte vacker, men den förtjänar lite värdighet. Inte rakt upp så och så bara gå in rakt in i döden och flugorna och visa sjukdomen och allting. Vi skulle inte göra det mot våra egna barn. Vi har gränser för vad vi låter journalister få göra mot vårt eget folk. Men när det gäller afrikaner så är det helt okej, därför att de kan inte läsa och skriva ändå, så det gör ingenting.
The Niger crisis is an example of how a crisis in an African country is portrayed according to a particular script, which doesn't actually necessarily fit the reality of that crisis.
Alex de Waal is a professor at Harvard University and one of the world's leading experts on famine and aid programs. He points out that 2005 was a difficult year in Niger, but he doesn't trust the relief organizations and the media's coverage of these kinds of crises and their use of figures.
Figures are used amazingly casually by senior members of relief agencies of the UN and also by the media in these contexts. The truth is they don't know. But in order to gain attention to these crises, figures are usually calculated, estimated, and let's be frank, invented. But the reality is nobody knows.
Millioner sulter I Niger nå.
Hundretusener står I fare for å dø.
Jan Egeland kjemper for millioner av døende I Niger.
3,5 millioner mennesker sulter.
3,6 millioner mennesker svelt.
3.6 million people, 1/3 of the population, are now affected by the emergency.
FN har oppdatert sine tall på mennesker som rammet av sult og tørkekatastrofen, og det nå oppe I 3,5 millioner mennesker.
Du brukte 3,5 millioner?
3,5 millioner rammet, ja. Ja, det jo ett helt realistiskt antal.
3,6 miljoner människor ute I landet, du missar dem inte. Nigerierna kan ju inte ha missat dem. Någon måste ju känt någon som har känt någon som har sett de här människorna. Men hela landet sitter och säger, ja, vi har hört om det på TV, vi har hört om det på radio, vi har sett om det på TV. Men vi har inte sett det själva, vi känner ingen, det är någon annanstans.
What was the reality for the farmers in the area that was supposedly among the worst struck by the famine?
Well, Africa doesn't answer back. We don't hear the voices from the village in Africa saying this is really what happened.
We equipped Maurice with a camera and a microphone on several of his trips to the countryside. It might help that our presence didn't affect the answers he received.
kwanan shi ya kare ai mutuwa amma dai wannan nan yunwa dai a'a ake dai yunwa ce an rasa abin da za a ci har yunwa ta kashe mutum a'a
ina ne gidajen ku gidajen ku wai ina ne
can ne bayan wajen wajen takuna kwaji.
Maurice meets two female beggars in the town of Zinder, beggars in the poorest country in the world.
mutane suna da kirki suna ba ku sadaka
da suna ba mu yanzu ko ba ta ba mu ne kwanan ma belo biye kaɗe ni yanzu samun sauƙi ne na hoto samu abin da zan yi buɗe baki
wai aka ce wai shekara wajen BBC ta ce shekara 2 da suka wuce mutane duk sun mutu a nan ƙasarmu da yunwa kun gan su wanda suka mutu tirani ko ka mu gan shi ba wai ta ce wai a rayuwarki ai biki gaba wanda fakat aka ce yunwa ce kadai ta kashe shi ban gani ba.
Je couvre presque tout le département de Tanout dans le travail et je circule partout. Mais cette catastrophe, là-bas, tous, on a seulement entendu ça. Mais pas vraiment vu ça, pas vu ça.
Maurice meets 2,500 farmers and their families every year. Rumours move fast in the countryside. If 3.5 million people were struck by famine, wouldn't he have known?
Si c'est 100 personnes affectées par la famine dans cette région, je le saurais.
3,6 millioner en tredjedel av befolkningen. Og ikke kunne treffe ett menneske som kjenner noen, det umulig. Estonia-katastrofen, det var 1000 mennesker, og det var nok. Tsunamien var nok for at du skulle kjenne til noen som I hvert fall kjente noen som hadde vært med om det.
Det var ingen som brukte så høye tall som deg